Liberalism, right? Liberalism, I cheated a bit. Liberalism is not actually on the same level as these other two because it's older than the other two. Liberalism is not a 19th century ideology. It's an 18th century one. But it got power at the same time as the others, or a little bit before it, and it still kept going until today. So I lump it in with the other three just to make some kind of comparison, right? Um, so liberalism is also quite a fuzzy concept. It's a very broad concept. Liberalism is not really a plan of what to do. Neoliberalism is, but normal liberalism is not. It's more of a set of political values and principles. It's just a number of political positions that people agree on, rather than that there's a giant plan of liberalism. And to show you how broad it is, practically all Mexican parties are liberal to some extent, um, including Morena and the PT. Although I would classify them as socialist, they still have things in common with liberalism, some things. So it's a very broad movement that influenced most of Western politics. We sometimes compare it to socialism, although they're not exactly opposites. And then I guess in a more kindergarten way, you would say that liberalism is more about freedom and socialism is more about equality, but that's not really true. They're both about both. Liberalism is about freedom, yes, it's in the name, but they also value political equality. And socialism is about equality, yes, but they also want to liberate people from other things. They want to emancipate people from um, exploitation. They want to give people opportunities. So they're not really opposites in that extent. Really, what liberalism means depends a lot on the context of it. You see, this word, this is the fault of the Americans, in short. This word used to have a clear definition um, in Europe, where it originated from, but its use changed depending on who, on the rest of the political spectrum, on what it's reacting to. In the United States, you only have two main parties, right? And your choice is between a liberal, right now, Biden today, or between a conservative slash fascist, Trump. So if your alternative is conservative slash fascist, then yeah, the other guy is going to look like they're to the left of them, right? And they are. Biden is to the left of Trump. But Biden is not a left-wing politician by any standards, right? So yes, he's a liberal, but liberal, only from an American point of view does liberal mean left. So Americans are going to use that word as a synonym for socialism, even if it's not, and even if these things are different, and in the rest of the world we don't use them like that. But if you watch American TV, you might get confused about how they use that word, right? In most countries, you have socialist parties in the world, and if they exist, not in the US, but if they exist, then liberals are usually seen in opposition to them. So now liberals are to the right of the mainstream, right? For example, in Mexico they are. Um, or in most countries, liberals are center right, right? So how you use the word depends a bit on where you are. I'm European. I'm gonna use them in the European, I would say, historical sense of the word as a center right ideology. But if you live in a very dark country, it might sound as a lefty. Now, liberalism, as I said, is very, very broad. And I'm not going to discuss any particular author today, because there are hundreds, and not one of them owns liberalism. So I'm going to talk about kind of a mix of different ideas from different people without naming them, because we don't have time for that, because we don't have time for nothing. Students, I have to hurry before I melt down like the chocolate monkey. But I can tell you some of these authors, and if you are very interested in liberalism, you could maybe read them. They're all, except for Jeremy Bentham, who's a loser, but all of them are real philosophers. They're all worth reading. Right? These are all important people. So you have John Locke, we already saw him. You have John Stuart Mill, the first, let's say, real liberal. Bentham, not worth your time. Adam Smith, the economist that you will learn about in History of Economic Thought and should have learned about already. Thomas Green from social side of things. Montesquieu and Alexis de Tocqueville from Democracy on America, quite a classic. So these are all the old guys, right? And then if you talk about last century liberals, which is also quite old, most of them are dead. I think all of them are dead, except Amartya Sen. You have Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman, who are neoliberals. And you have Mr. Keynes, Amartya Sen, and John Rawls, and the more social liberals. As you can see, I am using some additional words here, right? You have the old liberals, you have the neoliberals, and you have the social liberals. They're different kinds of liberals. Today I'm going to talk in historical order about the classic and social liberals, because that's the order in which they appeared on the world. Neoliberalism, the new liberalism, is for another time. That will be the last class I will teach you before I disappear into the void. Yeah. But that's for another time. I'm not going to talk about them right now. In short, they're more radical than the classical liberals. They're more fanatic. That would be the main difference between them. So, what's liberalism about? Unsurprisingly, it's about individual freedom. That's in the name, right? Liberty. So, but we must understand where this comes from in a historical context. This is good, Hegelians. So they're not reacting to communism, because communism is a reaction to liberalism, not the other way around, right? It's a reaction to medieval times, to feudal society, to the things we saw in the past, right? If you remember, in medieval times, you, especially if you were a woman, you had so many different people you had to listen to. You had to listen to your husband, your father, the local mayor, the knight, the lord, the duke, the king, the emperor, the priest, the bishop, and the pope, right? So there's a bunch of people telling you what to do. So most people were not particularly free in these times, yes? What liberalism wants is for individuals to be able to make their own choices and to not be constantly bossed around by political leaders, at least. Then I'll be bossed around by their literal boss, but that's, you know, that's the poison we're taking in their mind. So it wants to enable individuals to make their own choices instead of being constantly micro-regulated in their morals. So the focus with liberalism is purely individual. It's about you. It's about nobody else. It's not about the group. It's not about your family. It's not about none of this, right? It's about you and me, but not us. Yes. So the focus is to, in short, set the individual free from the group. Groups, sociologically, historically, have all kinds of claims and demands they make on people. Usually for good reasons, like survival, right? Like, if you meet the enemy, don't bring them back to camp, right? That's a claim that the group would make on individuals. Or, why don't you stay inside and wear a mouth mask so we don't all get COVID? Yes. Now, liberalism doesn't like this. They want to free the individual from the group and the demands the group makes on the individual, even if they usually are justified, because they would see that as oppressive. They say we don't need that because we can trust the individual. We don't need to listen to any guidelines. We assume, this is a very big assumption, we assume that the individuals follow their rational self-interest, that they are capable of rationally understanding what is good for them, right? That everybody is acting in their rational self-interest. This is usually, if I had done a test, where I would bring up the bad results of the test and say, some of you are bad liberals because you apparently didn't know you had to study. But liberals assume they trust you with this. Say people are going to act in their rational self-interest. A bit of a paradox is that some of the first liberals, not the later ones, that's not a problem with them, they had a very simplistic understanding of human psychology, right? They were still on this, oh, humans just want pleasure and avoid pain type of robotic stuff. which is weird because you're for freedom, but you don't really consider people free. People like Bentham, for example, they were on this weird track. But as time goes on, liberals become more and more consistent in their views on freedom. So anyway, they believe that each and single one of you will follow their rational self-interest. And that makes liberals quite optimistic. And that's cool. Liberals, true liberals, in general, are nice people to hang out with because they believe in you. They're positive. They have a positive worldview. They think the world is going to improve more or less on it. They think that things are going to go the right direction if we just let things happen, which is very Hakuna Matata type of philosophy, right? And they also trust you. They believe in people. They believe that free individuals will make the right choices, at least for themselves. They're not going to try to meddle with what you should do, right? If you tell them, oh, I'm going to do this, they're going to be like, sounds great, Anna. Sounds like an awesome plan. So liberals are genuinely likable friends and people because they believe in the individual, and you are an individual. Now, what does this freedom mean in practice, right? Historically, they were not arguing for abstract freedom and to do backflips in the desert. They were arguing for very real things that people were deprived of. For example, freedom of religion. Right? In many countries, they have a state religion and you get prosecuted if you didn't believe that. They thought, we trust individuals to make the right choice. If they believe in the wrong God and go to hell, that's their problem. We're going to allow this. They believed in freedom of opinion, right? A true liberal, for example, you didn't have much freedom of opinion in the time of Marx. We saw that because the government closed down all of his newspapers and prosecuted him for that, right? Now, a real liberal would want Marx to be able to say his opinion, even if they have opposite opinions, and they do, right? So they were for freedom of opinion, freedom of press, and also freedom of relation. So, for example, the right to divorce, or the right to marriage, or the right to have sex without marriage, are these kind of things, right? So the government wouldn't judge people for these private things they do. It's also a liberal concern in general. But that doesn't mean that liberals are just about freedom. Liberalism, although it doesn't care very much for equality, it does care for equality because in order to be really free, they think that you would need formal equality. Liberalism, and this is different with conservatism, for example, believes that if you treat people as radically indifferent, you cannot really have an open and free society. If you don't allow indigenous people to go to university, for example, right, that's not treating them as equal, you can't really say that your society is free because some people cannot do certain things, right? So if you treat certain citizens, at least politically, as different, if you cannot vote, right, because you are this or that, you're not fully free, they would say, right? Even if the government leaves you alone, they're not going to harass you. Just the fact that you don't have the same options as other people, that limits your scope of action, therefore limits your freedom. So liberals strived at least for political and legal equality, right? To have the right to vote, to have the right to property, to have these rights for everyone. Not, of course, real equality, not equality in the private sphere, not equality in any economical sense, not equality of outcomes, not any equality that, you know, physically mattered, but equality in the political, legal sense. It also mattered, right, for your position in society. And if you're for that type of legal equality, for political equality, you're probably not in favor of a monarchy, right? If everybody is equal, it doesn't make sense to have a king who is not equal. So typically liberals favor a form of a republic without a permanent leader. Now, how is this freedom organized? Yes, now things get a bit deeper or a bit more complex. So liberals are not anarchists. Liberals don't believe that people could do whatever, and that if we just leave people alone, that things will be all right. They trust the choice of individuals, but sometimes people do bad things. And the question is, what do you do then, right? They don't believe that people can literally be free. They want still society to be orderly, right? Most importantly, that property is protected and that the rich are safe. So they still want there to be order, and they want you to stop from harming others. Yes, they're not for this. You do have that. You have this kind of nihilist anarchism, but that's not liberalism. Liberalism is about law and order too. Liberalism, in order to organize this order, and this sets it apart from other ideologies, very heavily depends on the concept of law. Liberalism is a true legal philosophy. It very strongly depends on rights and constitutions and these kind of things to protect people. So liberalism basically is about organizing the rules of society, right? And that's what the philosophy is trying to do. You say we're going to play this game, and in this game there are going to be certain rules, and we're going to have the state protect these rules, right? Now that seems very obvious to you, like teacher, why are you telling us this? Well, you have to understand what the alternatives are, right? You could also organize society, not based on rights, but based on duties, for example. So instead of you having a right to safety, I have a duty to not harm you, right? For example, Mahatma Gandhi thinks more in that direction. He says instead of human rights, maybe we should have human duties and it would be more productive than have this legal system, which is obligations on people. That's an alternative to rights, yes. Another alternative, the more Marxist one, is to achieve order through creating a world in which you don't really have either the incentive or the possibility to harm me, right? To create a world in which you are not going to exploit me because we all have equal means of production, right? If you cannot become more powerful than me, you're also not going to harm me in that sense, right? You're not going to create any vulnerability in people, right? If we have the means of production equally distributed, then I'm quite emancipated. I'm quite strong versus other people, and they're not going to take advantage of me. Or in communism, if everybody has a car, then you're not going to steal my car, right? So that's a different way of preventing problems, right? Or in a more conservative version, you're not going to harm me because I have a gun, right? These are all different ways of looking at things. You're not going to harm me because I have a right. Here it says in this book, now you cannot rob me. That's a different conception. I hope you understand what I'm saying. So liberals depend very heavily on this idea of law, right? And constitutions also to protect people from the majority, to protect people from democracy. So they have a strong faith in legal institutions. If your legal institution, that means the courts, lawyers, judges, the police, if they're corrupt, the whole house comes down, right? Nothing works really in liberalism because it all comes down to the justice system. We let people be free, people are going to harm each other, but the justice system is going to correct this. Yeah. And everybody needs thus equal rights and needs an equal right to defense. If you don't have that, things start getting corrupt. You can think of Mexico if we have that or not. And at some point, the law here starts again to replace morality, right? It's all about the law. So if it's not legally forbidden, it's also fine in a liberal point of view. Let me give you an example of a very common malpractice in research of things being legal yet to me wrong. In UDEM, when you get research money, they take from the government, they will take 30% of that, the company of UDEM, which is not what you budgeted, they'll just take it. And of that remaining 70%, they will force you to spend it on buying things. So you cannot use it as wage. You can only use it to hire and buying things, because then you will generate tax receipts and they will claim all of that on their taxes. Which means that the government pays twice. If the government pays me 200,000 pesos for research, they end up paying 400,000 pesos because the company is going to claim all of those 200,000 pesos on their taxes, right? So every peso they pay 2. that is morally bankrupt, right? Because you're stealing from the government, but it is legal. It's set up like that. So liberal would say, oh, it's fine. Hey, it was allowed. It's good. So in this system, the role of the state really is to enforce the law, right? Not to create justice. Justice is there to be judged afterwards, right? We're not going to try to prevent problems. We're not going to organize education, healthcare, things like that. The state is there to police society, to have courts so we can sue each other, to be a referee, basically, right? You have the rules of the game. We have to play the game. The state's the referee. That's the role of the state in this. To organize freedom. Now, which freedom is most important to liberals nowadays is, of course, economic liberty, right? Because liberalism is the ideology of capitalism, one of them at least, depending on how angry capitalism is. But they are different things. This is very important. Liberalism and capitalism are different things. Capitalism does not need liberalism. You have many capitalist countries that are not liberal. China, to name one. China is a capitalist economy, does not have liberal politics. Indonesia is a capitalist economy, by no stretch of the imagination liberal. Saudi Arabia is a capitalist economy, but is not liberal, right? So if you like capitalism because of any values you associate with it, you're not really talking about capitalism. Capitalism has no values. Capitalism is about profit, period, nothing else, right? The things that you associate with capitalism really are liberalism, right? So not all capitalists are liberals. I would say at this moment on earth, most are not, but most liberals are capitalists, right? Liberalism prefers capitalism. It sees the free market as, the natural, the natural fit for a liberty, right? And historically, this grows from a reaction against how business was hindered. In feudal times, in medieval times, right, economic activity was very hindered by all kinds of regulations. For example, you have guilds. That means that if you want to be a butcher, you need to sign up to the guild of butchers, and they need to allow you to be a butcher in that city. And you need to go to all kinds of tests, and you need to do an apprenticeship for years that you have to work for another butcher. And then finally you can start your own, meat shop. So that's very complex. You also you couldn't do interest, you couldn't have loans back in those days. All kind of things that are not really friendly to capitalism. So they want to change that. In later times, mercantilist times, which I think I never explained what that means, but mercantilism in short is capitalism without free trade. This capitalism in which you have capitalist mode of production, right? You have capitalists, you have workers, they exploit them to make profit. But countries are each going to try to sell as much as possible without buying anything from each other, right? They each going to try to get as much gold as possible from each other. So you don't have free trade. The government is going to regulate trade. They're going to say, oh, you want to export? That's great. Oh, you want to import? Better not, right? Liberals saw this as a limitation of liberty. So you have the first liberal economists, like Adam Smith, who thought, no, we should have a system, where we again, instead of people, we trust now countries to all act in their rational self-interest, and to have free trade with each other, right? Isn't it? If we all would have free trade with each other, even if it doesn't look like it would be better on first sight, it will be. We will all win if we will all play this game. So he promoted free trade, individual property, competition, etc. We're not going to go in much detail because you'll have whole class on Adam Smith in other classes. So therefore, economic freedom. But then the question is, but why exactly, right? Why exactly would that be better? Because what people did before that, they did for a reason, right? It somehow worked for them too. So why is this better? Well, here liberalism becomes a bit more edgy. let's say. It becomes a bit more weird. So liberalism comes with a dogmatic belief in rational self-interest, right? They don't just believe that people follow their rational self-interest. They also believe that if you follow your rational self-interest, that it somehow is good. They believe that pursuing your individual selfish interests is good for everybody. That's a basic premise of liberalism. Otherwise, the whole system comes down. Is the idea that if I am selfish and I do only what's best for me, then that somehow, somewhere, is going to be good for you too. Matter of fact, it's going to be good for the whole of society if I am selfish. So in that logic, it's better to be selfish than to try to do good. Because by being selfish, I'm going to do good, right? It will somehow, somewhere, end up having good effects for society. As Adam Smith would say, as if guided by an invisible hand. Right? If you ever played Smash Bros, you have this invisible hand at the end. So the idea is that we, even if we would somehow all do what's selfish to us, that then, if guided by an invisible hand, dear students, somehow it's going to be all right. Now, to me, that sounds like a contradiction, probably because it is a contradiction. But there is a logic to it, right? I'm making a bit fun of it here, but there is a logic to this, and this is the logic. The logic behind this idea is that competition brings out the best in us. It's the idea that, okay, following a self-interest in a market society, for most people, means getting rich. Now, how do I get rich? If I want to get rich, it means I don't already have the money, right? It means somebody else has the money. So I now need to get that money from these people. And I'm going to do that by trying to sell them something, right? I'm going to do that by making myself useful, by working for them, or if they're clients of mine, by serving them. And so in order to get that money, we're all going to do useful economical activities, right? We're all going to work, and we're going to work as hard as we could. So therefore, since everybody's working, everybody's being productive, and that is what liberals understand as good for society, right? Being productive, which means we get better services, which means we get lower prices, etc. They don't mean good society in any moral sense. They just mean that if we all do this, we all follow self-interest, we're going to create an economy, really, that is going to be productive because of competition. There's a logic behind it. Now, people like me and, I don't know, Jesus Christ, still think there is a contradiction between doing what's in your self-interest and what is good for the group. I think it's a categorical contradiction, but in liberal logic, right, you have this harmony of interests. Liberals, and in a sense almost all right-wing ideologies, believe that there is a natural harmony in society, that what we're trying to do somehow will all work out, that if we all go in different directions, right, that then guided by an invisible hand, this somehow will balance itself out. I go that direction, but you go that direction, and somehow balance itself out. That if we're all trying to do different things, that somehow this will create a harmony. So they believe in a sort of natural balance, which is a metaphysical concept, right? They believe that somehow society, well, that the market naturally balances itself. That in the end there is this harmony, which is radically opposed to the last two thinkers we saw. Both Marx and Hegel believe in contradiction. They believe that history is a process that reacts to the mistakes of the previous thing, right? Especially Marx does not believe there's any harmony in society. He believes there's fundamental disagreement, that you have two classes that are fighting over something and they will never agree, right? Liberals will try to pretend that the interest of the capitalist and the interest of the workers is somehow the same thing, right? It all works for the better of society. Now, if this is true, if that is true, if there is a natural harmony, well, then the state should not poke that harmony, right? If it's not broke, don't try to fix it. The state should not interfere with this harmony too much. It should just be the referee and then let the game play out, because it's going to end up good anyway. So the state should stay away from the economy in a liberal view. So that's the classic liberal perspective here, right? And they believe there's a natural harmony of interests, and they believe that it's good enough for the state to just protect basic rights. And if we do that, things are going to be all right, because they're optimists, right? They think that is going to create a good society, a good world. Now, not all liberals actually agree with that, because you historically had a split between the classic liberals, which is everything I said now, and social liberalism. So social liberalism, just to put a face on it, so you can already recognize what I'm talking about. Social liberals are people like today would be Obama or Justin Trudeau or Macron. These type of people. Macron was maybe a bit more to the left than this, but this is what you could understand as social liberals. So social liberals historically, right? They believed in everything classic liberals said, but they also believed that it's not good enough. They believed that the state should do a bit more than just protect rights. Yeah. They saw a bit more active role for the state. Now, why is that? First of all, it's just because of their empirical observation that things were not working out. They believed the theory of harmony of interests, natural harmony. They believed what Adam Smith said. However, they also had a window in their house, and when they looked out of that window, they saw thousands of poor people passing by each day, right? So they simply empirically observed that there's a disconnect between the theory and what had happened in first liberal capitalist times. They were not blind to reality, right? They saw what Marx saw. There's a bunch of poor people, right? Apparently, there's this disconnect between theory and reality here, right? They understood that unchecked capitalism was not always in the interest of everyone, and that sometimes it could harm people. They also understood, so what's the problem then, right? Is the theory wrong? No, the theory is not wrong, they said. It's just that the theory assumes certain circumstances, right? They recognize that individual freedom and rational thinking, for example, don't automatically happen. You need to create certain circumstances for people to be free in. And if those don't exist, then the game doesn't really work, right? So they're saying, is Monopoly a fair game? They would say yes. Little Monopoly, the game, the board game, right? They would say, let's say Monopoly is liberalism. They would say, yeah, Monopoly is a fair game. The problem is that we started playing where one player has all the money, right? And the bank also is a player. So that's not fair, right? If you imagine Monopoly and you start Monopoly with one person at the board having all the money, then that person is 99% of the time going to win, right? So they recognize that capitalism didn't start as an equal competition, and we shouldn't treat it like that. You're delusional if you pretend that we are in a fair competition. We are not, right? There is very low social mobility, and some people historically were just rich. It's not that the bourgeoisie just came from the working class. No, they came from the previous elite. So if you really want the game to be fair, and they believe in the game, you need to create, well, an equal start for people, right? You need to create equal opportunities, not just equal rights. It's cynical to pretend that we're equal when we're not. Yes. So we need to reset the game. Yes, we're going to play Monopoly. We're going to do this freedom, this capitalist stuff, but we're going to try to create an equal start, at least. And that's what social liberalism tries to do. Now, they innovate also in their idea of what an equal start is by introducing a different concept of liberty here. By the way, I'm going very fast, I just noticed. Let me pause for a second. Let me go back. Is there anything that is unclear in what I've explained so far?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Good. You can interrupt me if you do have questions. Okay. Everything is good, she says. That's a reassuring statement. So liberals, social liberals, like Green and Berlin is very worth reading, by the way. They innovate a bit in explaining why we need to do this by making a distinction between positive and negative liberty. These are very interesting concepts for you to understand. They're hard to understand because they're a bit counterintuitive, but they will help you understand society a bit better. So try to follow along with what I'm going to say. So positive and negative liberty are not, let me say this, are not moral categories. Positive liberty is not good and negative liberty is not bad. That's not what it means. Positive and negative are mathematical terms. Positive means that something is above zero and negative means that it's not there, right? Positive means it's there, negative means it's not there. Okay, how does it apply to liberty? Negative liberty, which is what you usually understand as liberty, is the absence of external restrictions in what you want to do. We all discussed this a bit with Hegel. Negative liberty is liberty that exists because something is not there. You're free because of the absence of something. That's why it's called negative. The freedom is in the negative. It's in the not being there of things. So you're negatively free when you're not in a cage, for example, right? You're negatively free when I don't grab you and hold you from going somewhere, right? You're negatively free when the police has not arrested you. So negative freedom is the absence of restrictions, of barriers in doing what you want to do. So if you're jumping around the desert, you're negatively free because nobody's stopping you, right? Positive liberty is a different concept. This is close to what we discussed with Hegel. It's you being actually able to do what you want. So you have the self-control, right? It's one aspect of it, not to be affected, but also to be able to actually do it, what you want to do, which is different from not being stopped from doing what you want to do. For example, let's say I want to buy bread, but there is no bread. In the negative sense, I'm still free. Nobody's stopping me from buying bread, except I can't buy bread because there is no bread. So I don't have the positive liberty to buy bread, right? Or if I don't have money to buy bread, I'm also not free to buy bread because I'm not going to do it, right? So positive liberty is the liberty to actually do it. Negative liberty is liberty to not be stopped from doing it, right? To explain this in another sense, at the faculty, I don't know if you remember these old times, when there still was a faculty and you would physically go there and things. This is a long time ago. But if you can remember this time in the past when there still was a faculty, you have the lower part of the faculty, right, where the director is. Let's say I want to go to the director, but let's say I'm in a wheelchair. I actually move. You guys don't know that, but I roll around like this all day. No, it's not true. But let's say I was in a wheelchair. I want to talk to the director. I roll up to the parking lot. The problem is that the director is upstairs and I can't get on these stairs. So now I still have the negative liberty to go talk to the director because nobody's going to kick me when I try to do that. But I don't have the positive liberty because I can't get up the stairs, right? In order to have the positive liberty, you would need a building like Postgrado, the building on the hill. Because there you have a ramp for wheelchairs. The old building doesn't have that, but the new building does, right? So the new building takes my positive liberty into account if I would be in a wheelchair, because it allows me to roll up there, while the old building doesn't. Yeah, that's the difference between negative and positive freedom. So social liberals point to this positive freedom, this positive liberty. They say, in order to be actually free, we have a few requirements. It's not enough for the government just to, figure it out, right?
We need things like basic education, We need things like food. If there's no food, then we're not positively free. We need some minimal healthcare. At least the government should have some basic access to healthcare. There should be some opportunities. So there is a bigger role for the state, right? Making people, making sure that people can enjoy their freedom, have very minimal economical rights. Government is not responsible for doing any of these things good, or to put a lot of effort in it. But there should be some absolute minimal type of economic rights in social liberalism. So if you, dear students, if you, unlike me, are a liberal, or if you feel appealed to this, if you already, before taking this course, had strong liberal ideas, I want to invite you to have a look at social liberalism and to read some of these things and to wonder, could I, for, I don't know, 2% more taxes, couldn't we just create a considerably fairer society if we would allow the government to do some absolutely minimal things, like having public primary education, right? For almost the same money, couldn't we, just as well make things a little bit more fair? I think it's worth thinking about if you are attracted to this ideology. So that is social liberalism. And that kind of was the second wave of liberalism. So historically, how did this game play out, right? Liberalism was successful. It's probably the most successful ideology in terms of spreading throughout history of political thought. It became one of the most dominant and broadest streams of political philosophy. Probably right in front of socialism as a close runner-up to that. It was in many cases on the right side of history. For example, liberalism in most cases, not the early ones, not John Locke, but most people after them are for some type of democracy, very limited democracy, with a very big constitution that tells you all things you cannot vote on, and with no direct representation of the people. But they are nonetheless for some sort of democracy. And that's important historically, right? Socialists, communists fought a lot of this fight for democracy, but liberals also fought that fight, and they together were able to get it. So that's one of their roles in history. And in general, liberalism is just broadly likable. Even if not everybody is liberal, nobody hates it either. Liberalism is a bit like apple pie, I would say, like a recipe for apple pie. It's probably going to be the same in 200 years, right? It's a classic. It aged well. And most people like it, right? Maybe not every one of us is mad about apple pie. Nobody hates apple pie either. It's kind of weird if you do, right? So liberalism is a bit like that. Yeah, who doesn't like freedom, right? So it's easy to appeal to people. Even socialism is partly inspired by liberalism. It's inspired by Marxism, but also from other sources, right? They also took this emancipatory fight against religious oppression, for example, or for sexual equality, or things like that, for legal equality, right? They have the same root, right? They're fighting for political equality. Socialism just takes it a step further. But some part of the road, they're traveling together, right? Socialism and liberalism are not opposites. They're competitors in the political spectrum. They're each other's main alternative, but they're not opposites. The opposite of liberalism is not socialism. The opposite of liberalism is something like a religious dictatorship, right? Something like Iran or Afghanistan are the opposite of liberal countries. Because you're constantly told what to do, even in private life, right? Socialist countries are a lot closer to a liberal idea than those countries are. So that was inspired by it. But you also have ideologies that are going to react against liberalism. Communism, to some extent, to capitalism, obviously, but especially fascism, historically, is a reaction to liberalism. Fascism almost always, I'll explain this, comes after liberalism. At least in all circumstances, I know you had a liberal politics before you had a fascist one, which is a big warning to liberals because you know what's next. Or a communist or a left turn. But both kind of react to that. And that's the ideologies we're going to see next, right? We're going to see how they differ here. Now, how did liberalism evolve? Well, you had classical liberalism first, then you had social liberals. And then it become more radical again. From the 1970s onward, you would have neoliberalism, which is a revival of the classical idea, just on steroids. But that I'm going to explain another time, right? The radical version of this, the total surrender to the market, the total surrender to capitalism, that comes later in time. So that's the story of liberalism. Do you have any questions? I have more slides in which I will criticize liberalism. But first, do you have any questions or remarks or things you want to say about this? Okay. It's like I pick up the phone, I just hear the noise. I'll just assume you're still there and not having breakfast with your family downstairs. Okay, everything is clear. Well, liberalism, partly you already know, because liberalism is the dominant ideology, right? Liberalism is the default. It is in the middle of the political, well, not in the middle, it's in the center right of the political spectrum, but it's what inspired most of the things you do know. So let me now criticize it. Why? Why would I criticize it? Teacher, don't you like apple pie? I do. Teacher, don't you want liberals to be free? Don't you want people to be free from the group at all times? No, I don't, actually. And let me explain you why. So let me criticize liberalism, which is not a very sympathetic thing to do because liberals are nice people, right, teacher? What are you doing? Okay, I'm going to criticize it from 4 perspectives. Conservative one, a Marxist one, a socialist one, and a fascist one. First of all, you could argue that liberalism is simply very naive in believing in people being rational all the time, right? We overtrust people's rationality and foresight. I think that the COVID epidemic is quite a big blow to these liberal assumptions, right? As if I can trust other people without commanding them that they're somehow gonna, act in their self-interest. That's not exactly what is happening right now, right? You can ask yourself if you would do what you really want to do and go outside and do all the things that you've been wanting to do for a while, is that going to create a better situation for us? I would be very skeptical of that idea, right? So you could criticize it from that perspective. You could also say that liberalism is quite prone to corruption, right? If you set up a system based around people following their self-interest, can you be surprised that they break the self-interest? If you teach people since childhood to follow their self and to act for them, can you be surprised that they act unethically? Well, ethics, by definition, is acting in the interest of other people, right? I would say no, you should not be surprised. I think this is a logical consequence of these premises. Now, liberals would respond to this, right, by saying, well, you think this because you're just traumatized, because you grew up around bad people, right? Most people are good. Most people are rational. You're just projecting, teacher. You're a loser. That's why you think other people are losers too. So don't do that. Stop hating, right? Also, liberalism will say, yeah, but people need to learn to be free, right? Once they understand the consequence of their choices, once you get COVID, you might not do it again, right? Okay, let's leave it there. Second type of criticism. From the Marxist angle, you could simply say that liberalism is a bedtime story for capitalism, right? It's a set of values of freedom and equality that we just project on a system that is about none of this. Capitalism is not about freedom. It's not about equality. It's about profit. Capitalism is a system of investing money to make more money. And that's it, right? You can make it sound good. You could say, yeah, what is exploitation? We call it, I don't know, free choice of employment, free contract. You can put the word free in front of a lot of things. But at the end of the day, it's just exploitation, right? You're talking about the exact same thing Marx is talking about, just in more flowery words. And Marx would say that this theory is just overly optimistic about the course of history. Right? It says capitalism is going to end well. It didn't. So this is dangerous. If you constantly talk in euphemisms about what really is just the same capitalist elite-driven ideology as it always was, it just, it's the same as the other set, just with a smiley on it, right? That doesn't really change anything. We're still approaching disaster. Plus, you could say that this freedom. One of the proof of it is that it's kind of fake. This freedom is only there if it fits the elite. I won't have time because of the faculty changing our schedule, but I was going to demonstrate to you next time how in this continent, right, liberal democracy only happens as long as you vote for the right. In every country except Mexico too, there have been instances where people voted socialist or communist and they got killed. The Americans invaded. There was a coup. I'll send you the slides. There's a very long list of practically every country where people had free democracy, but they made the wrong choice. They voted for the left. Can't have that. So bam, they get invaded. They get killed. They get bombed. Their government is imprisoned. Every country: Haiti, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, Colombia, Bolivia, Argentina, Brazil, Venezuela, Ecuador, Uruguay, Chile. All of them had this happen to them, right? So yeah, you're free as long as you make the right choice. If not, we kill you, right? That would be a Marxist and communist critique of liberalism. For things to actually be equal, for example, with feminism, still hasn't happened, has it? So maybe this is just a promise that is fake from the start. You could, again, react to that. Yeah, but you communists are haters. We did create a more free society than before that. So we did do better. Plus, communism didn't turn out so free either. So, hey, we're still the most true to it. Plus, you could, as a liberal, you could simply say, yes, it's true. And capitalism is great. We are that. We're not pretending we're not this. We are arguing for capitalism, and capitalism is good. Right? That would be a counter to that. Still. Now, let's get to my main critique and the reason that I am not a liberal and not could be. The biggest flaw of liberalism is that it cannot deal with collective problems. Again, I don't have the time, but my course would normally end with me giving a long list of collective problems and how we can solve them. So liberalism, if you think about this, right, liberalism is particularly bad in dealing with problems. Why? Because most modern problems require some type of cooperation between people. And if people are free, if we believe strongly in negative freedom, if the government cannot interfere with people, if the group cannot make demands of people, how are we going to avoid any disastrous problem? How are we going to avoid climate change? How are we going to avoid global inequality? How are we going to deal with these massive waves of immigration that we're going to get because of climate change? How are we going to deal with a global pandemic? I would say COVID
is kind of the nail in the coffin of liberalism as a serious theory. If people act in their own self-interest somehow worked out, this would not have happened, right? The real, I would say, you can not believe this because of fake news, but I think the only real solution, besides getting a vaccination, is that people don't go out, right? Is that people follow regulations, that people wear masks. If you cannot control the population, you cannot control this problem. So if you have a liberal government that says, no, people should be free, we cannot interfere, the government should not impose anything, like US, well, then you're going to hell, which happened. So even if your constitution is very liberal, like ours, where the federal government can't really impose things, you're still you're not going to solve the problem, right? So liberalism is notoriously bad at dealing with collective problems because there's a bias towards doing nothing. If you believe in a harmony of interest, you believe that things are going to figure themselves out. So typically the liberal reaction to any big problem is to just wait and see if it works itself out. Some people believe this. I really don't have the nerve to wait and hope things work out. I rather have a plan than have faith in things. I don't know about you. You can judge this for yourself. I believe that all big problems in the world are collective action problems. Therefore, I think liberalism is particularly problematic. Not as problematic as its neo-variant, but still. I don't also know if there's a good counter to this. You could think of it yourself. Now, a last criticism you could make, this comes from the far right more, is that liberalism is very vulnerable. Liberalism trusts that people are going to follow the law, right? It trusts that the law can enforce itself on people. But what happens if that doesn't work out, right? Both Marxists and conservatives, they look more at real material power, right? I'm safe because I got the material means to be safe. And I'm not safe because I have a right. And people are going to act reasonable and they're not going to harm me. So liberalism only works as long as everybody plays by the rules and doesn't, for example, start a drug organization that then kidnaps people, right? Imagine that would happen. Certainly not in Mexico, right? But imagine somebody would start a cartel. Oh my God, that would be terrible. So it only works as long as people play by the rules. And that's why liberalism is particularly vulnerable to fascism, because fascism does not play by the rules, which is usually why fascism comes after a liberal government, historically. But that's for next week. So those are 4 criticisms of liberalism, but liberalism overall, very likable ideology, just like apple pie. Now, what do you think? What do you think of my criticisms? What do you think about liberalism, dear students? Ms. Maria.
I have a question.
Okay.
Part of the reason why there weren't safety measures, well, the safety measures corresponding to the pandemic weren't enforced as strongly as they could have been, was a priority that many governments gave to the economy. Could that be an example of some of these liberalist ideas, or?
Depends a bit on the reason why, and if that's ideologically motivated. In Mexico, it was partly motivated because the government understood how poor people are, right? And they also understood that people wouldn't stop working anyway because they're too poor not to stop working. So I would say that's not truly ideologically motivated. But in the United States, if you look at what people say and why they say it, right? The arguments were always about, oh, but this is the American way of, right? America is about activity, it's about productivity, it's about freedom. So they would code it more in a freedom type story. So in that case, yes, it's an example. That doesn't mean that liberal governments are unable to do restrictions, right? They are able to do it. They just stop being liberal in that moment. But the people in charge, the leader, of course, he can do that. I'm not saying that they're all handled this badly. I'm just saying if you purely follow this ideology, you would not do that. Miss Astrid.
Yes, we saw liberalism, but in international relations theory, and it keeps the well, the same background, I guess. But the difference is that they focus more on what liberalism could do if a certain state goes to war, and how war affects the liberty, the freedom of people, because they mentioned that the militia or the military um, um, I forgot the word. Well, the militia takes a lot of time from the people, so by taking the time, they are also taking their freedom. So, what do you think about a liberalism in terms of time, but in this political way? Is it time as important as the private property? I don't know if I
I,
explained myself.
I, Look, Miss Astrid, I come from a very small town of 36,000 people. I don't always understand you. You're too complex for me. So I didn't understand that. I do know that because I teach international law. Liberalism in international relations has a different meaning than what I'm explaining. Liberalism in international relations is about solving collective problems, because it assumes that we have the rational foresight to understand that we need to work together, right? That's just not how it politically plays out. But that's a different use, I think, of the word. Even if they have similar roots, they take it a bit different. I do know that. Because I think in international relations, liberalism and rationalism are synonyms. I'm correct. Um, so I'm talking about a different thing here. I don't know what you mean with the time. Maybe you could try to explain it again, but keep in mind I'm kind of stupid.
Well, in the theory, they explain that time could be also taken as the private property, as something that people are the owners of. I mean that you all own your own time, which converts time into some kind of private property. I don't know if that makes it uh, more.
Well, yeah. I don't know what to make of that. Time doesn't exist to start with, right? It's not a thing. It's just the difference between two moments. So I don't know how that could be property, but
Well, yeah, I got some doubts about it too, because yes, as you mentioned, time doesn't exist. Or
so
at
okay,
least
wait.
I don't think that, but
I can make
they
sense of
explain in
okay.
a more complex way that when you take away time from people, when you put them to work the way
Mm-hmm.
you want them to do, as in it could be exploitation, you take them or take the right to acquire a certain thing because you are requiring them to work for you in the way that
Okay.
you
Okay, in
want
that
to.
sense. So liberalism, capitalism in general, does assume that you can trade time. Yes, that you can sell your time to people, that you can rent yourself. And in the previous system, in feudalism, you don't really. You owe the lord, the people on whose land you live, you owe them your time. If they want them, if they want you to build them a new house, you have to do that. If they want you to become a soldier, you have to do that. So liberalism, in a sense, you could say, is a reaction of people getting to make choices about their own time. I think I can connect in that sense. Um, think you said liberalism is a really good ideology at some points, but only if people follow the rules. It's different in theory and practice. It's really utopic. It's not that neoliberalism is very utopic, as we're gonna see, because liberalism doesn't. It just suggests we should do this. It doesn't say it's going to create a perfect world. But yeah, there's a difference in theory and practice. And again, I would say in theory, it still cannot solve problems. But yeah, it's an optimistic ideology. And that makes it liberals are nice people to be around. You should try to have at least one friend who's a liberal. Any other questions or remarks? Attacks? Okay. Also today, liberalism is quite rare. There are not a lot of, well, the Democrats are a big liberal party in the US, but outside that, most liberal parties today are neoliberal parties, are a bit more fundamentalist than what I explained today. Javier says, he says that communism is seen as utopic. I think, again, neoliberalism, the more extreme variant, and communism are very similar in the sense that they try to create perfect worlds through kind of far-going assumptions. So I think that you're onto this, that they're main competitors of each other, but they're quite similar in what they're trying to do, actually. So there's a kind of connection between the two. They're both very modern, you could say, in trying to change the world. All right. Let me maybe stop presenting, take down this meme. Do you have any questions about the course, since things have changed a bit?
Yeah, I have a question about the instructions of the final project.
What is your question?
Well, the instructions.
Okay, sorry. What you have to do is you have to write an essay of about 1,500 words or more about any topic related to the history of political thought. So this could be about any ideology, it could be about any author. Let's say you want to write about Rousseau, for example, you could write about some idea that Rousseau had, either in his time, you can compare him to Locke, or you could write about how we would apply Rousseau today. For example, Rousseau had this idea of direct democracy, right? You could talk about consultas that we have today in Mexico. Link the two, right? It could be many things. You could you don't even need to write about reality. You could analyze the politics of the Hunger Games, for example, as a movie, right? And say, well, what are they really trying to do, and what ideology does this relate to? You can link it to some kind of philosopher. So basically, you can write about anything politics, as long as it somehow relates to anything I've talked about. As the only thing you can't, and so that means only as long as it's about something public. Don't write about psychological things, for example, right? You want to keep it public politics. Like if you can say, I don't know, are robots really like humans? Like that's not the question we need to talk about. But if you want to talk about how robots impact the economy or how robots impact politics, yeah, you can do that. Yes. So write an essay of 2,500 words or more, maximum, let's say 2,500. You can do this alone or in terms of three. Sorry, I want to put on the slides because Maria asked for this. You could do that alone or in teams of three.
or 2, of course. I will also write that down. Does that answer your question a bit, Miss Yuno?
Yes, thank you.
Do you have an idea already about what you want to do?
I had one, but I have to discuss it with my teammates.
Okay. Good. Ms. Maria asked, can you share the author recommendations? So who are interesting here? Alexis Tocqueville is interesting. John Stuart Mill is interesting. Of the modern ones, like the furthest to the left you could go with this, with still being liberals, would be Keynes and Rawls. Especially Rawls. Rawls is really on the far left end of the liberal spectrum, almost edging on socialism. I think that Rawls is very readable. Rawls's main book is called A Theory of Justice, which is a nice principle. So students, let me take the last 15 minutes to explain you what I won't do. I'm going to take out a class. Next time, I was going to teach 2 classes about communism. I was going to teach one historical class, which explained you what happened. It explained you, it was going to be about Lenin, it was going to be the Russian Revolution. It was going to explain you basically, in short, how there's a difference between what Marx wanted and what we got historically. And I was going to explain why that happened, right? Why a country like Cuba is different from what Marx is writing about in the Communist Manifesto. Why a country like Soviet Union was different. They started trying one thing, but for historical circumstances, simply because things were hard to do, they had to change the plan on the road. In short, because communism started in the hardest countries. Communism was supposed to start in the West, in Germany and in England. But that, again, for historical reasons, didn't happen. Both world wars ruined that plan. It wasn't going to happen. Germany almost turned communist, but it didn't. Instead, communism happened in very poor, very underdeveloped countries, which was not what Marx has planned. Marx had planned this to start in the middle of Europe, not at the edge. But that's where it happened. It happened in China, it happened in Russia, it happened in various African countries, Vietnam, etc. In general, it happened in poor countries. And they had to change things because of circumstances, because they're also countries that were not democratic, etc., etc. And so what ended up happening was a system that was more autocratic than Marx had envisioned. It was a bit less democratic than he wanted. It had stronger role for leadership. It was a bit more paternalistic. It was a bit more like Plato and not like Rousseau, where you have a wise leadership who make the rules for people. Less this grassroots, more anarchisty thing that Marx was talking about. So I was going to explain in short the difference between communism, as in the Communist Manifesto, as a theory, and what I call real existing communism. That is the thing that happened in the 20th century. Yes. There's a difference between that, and that makes it complex to talk about communism, because people constantly confuse communism as the Marxist idea, as the Communist Manifesto, and communism as in the countries that we actually got. Although that's very normal in politics. There's also a difference between liberalism and countries that tried liberalism, right? There's a big gap there. But I cannot teach that class because of time. But now I told you already the main point of it, right? What I will teach to you next time is about this real existing communism. I'm going to teach a class. I'm going to skip the theory of it. I'm only going to talk about the practice. I'm going to talk about how was life in communism. That's my next class, right? How was it like? I think that should be an interesting class to most of you, because it's not necessarily true because it was different than what Marx has planned that it was necessarily worse, right? They're different things. It's not because there's a difference between theory and practice that the practice is automatically worse than the theory. That's what we will talk about next. All right. If nothing else, I maybe I could upload the slides of that missing class so you can look for yourself if you want that. But that's what will happen next time. If nothing else, I'm gonna let you go so you can have breakfast, and I'll see you later. Take care.
Have a good day.
Thank you, sir. Have a nice day.
Have a good day, sleepy people. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, teacher. Bye.